Okay.
It's 7:00. It's actually 7:01. We do have a quorum. So I am calling the September 24th Finance Committee meeting to order. This is obviously a Zoom meeting, and we are being broadcast and we are being recorded. So it'll be available later to people to see. The first order of business on our agenda is the introduction of new members.
Mary, do we need to do a roll?
To what, open the meeting?
Yeah, do we have to?
Before we do that, Carmen, I think you're in the waiting area. If you want to join us, that would be great.
Thought I saw her in the waiting room. And
Yeah, me
she
too.
disappeared.
Thank you. I have
Looks as if she's on.
now been elevated as a panelist.
Elevated?
Elevated.
Good. Good. Nice to see you. Okay, so roll call. I'll just go by my screen. Chris?
Here?
Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Dee? Horton?
Present.
Kathy?
Here.
John?
Present.
Dick?
Here.
Harshar? Greg?
Here.
Wade?
Here.
Somebody who's very, Carmen, Brian?
Here.
Great. Good. Good. We've got everyone except we have one of our two new members. So I'd like to take a minute to welcome Kathy. So Kathy, would you like to say a few things about yourself and let us know who you are and why you're here?
Oh my. Okay. Well, good evening, and thank you for deciding to ask me to join the financial committee of the town of Concord. I'm a resident of 19 years. I live out off of Old Marlborough Road here on Katarina Heights. I'm a CPA, and don't hold that against me. I started my career at Price Waterhouse. I spent 22 years at State Street Corporation, where I rose to the level of a division head for mutual fund accounting and regulatory reporting. So I have then gone on to do startups of mutual fund companies and exchange traded funds. And I'm now back home here in Concord, not just because of COVID, but also because I'm beginning my retirement. So I thought, what can I do here in the town? And the finance committee just seemed like the best place to start. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you and to get to know the work of the committee.
Great. Thanks. We're lucky to have you. Lois, do I see you down there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Hi. Do you want to introduce yourself to the committee and let us know your background a little bit, or anything you want to say, why you're here, what you hope to accomplish?
Sure. My name is Lois Wassoff. I've lived in Concord since 1992. I moved here when Concord was originally what I did for love. I moved here when I was getting married to my husband, who'd been living here for many years. And we bought a home here together when we got married. And I became, over the last long period of time, I've become more and more committed to the town, and more and more have felt like I really did leave New York when I moved here, and that this is really home. I've been a lawyer since 1975, and practiced in New York before I moved up here. When I moved here, I went in-house at Houghton Mifflin Company and was there for many years. And then when I left there in 2002, because my area of specialty, which is copyright law, but particularly as applied to book publishing, would have required me to relocate if I took another actual job. And I did not want to relocate, and neither did my husband. So I set up my own practice here, doing legal work and consulting work on copyright and copyright policy. Doing that kind of work up here means that I did a lot of work with nonprofits and ended up developing sort of a subspecialty in nonprofit governance. I retired like Kathy, but probably I retired about 2 years ago, and have been finding ways to stay engaged. And Carmen and I started talking about the possibility of my going on FinCom about 2 years ago. And partly as a result of COVID, I felt even more committed to my home here in Concord and to the town. So when she approached me about it again this summer, it seemed like the right thing to do. So here I am.
Great, welcome.
Great, welcome. Lois, can I ask, are you a Yankees fan?
You know, when I was interviewing for the job at Houghton
Ooh,
Mifflin,
don't hedge.
The
No.
litmus test.
I'm going to give you the honest answer. When I was interviewing for a job at Houghton Mifflin, one of the people I was interviewing with said to me, "Are you prepared to switch your allegiance to the Red Sox and the Celtics?" And I said, "I'd consider it. What sports do they play?" So I think, studied indifference has probably been my attitude toward all this. If you ever want to ask me questions about what I think about the complete absurd obsession, the idea that people drape their dogs and their newborn infants in Red Sox regalia, we can talk about it. But I'm not a Yankees fan, and to answer the question.
Well, you've both decided to join us in a very unusual year. This is going to be we just came off of a very unusual year. The upcoming year is going to be very unusual. If this was a normal year, there would have been an orientation training session for you and anybody else who wanted to refresh their knowledge of municipal finance sometime in August, I believe. But I believe the one we had last year, which was quite good, is available on video. Carrie, is that correct?
Is you should be able to access that on the Finance Committee webpage.
Great, thank you. So that's
Mary,
yes.
they do have another one upcoming at Zoom sort of session. Since I attended the one last year, I believe I'll forward it along to Carrie, but I believe they're doing a Zoom one this year.
So this is the state, the municipal.
This is a state, like municipal, like like how town finances run. I believe I get an email. Carrie, I'll forward it to you, so you can distribute it if you want.
Great.
I believe I've received some information about that.
Good. Well, actually, there are three opportunities you have for training. One is the thing that Greg just mentioned, which is more municipal. It's the whole Commonwealth. The second is something that Carrie designed, and it's more specific to Concord. And then there's a third something available this year, which drills down into school finances. So if you're interested in that, let me know, and I can give you the information for that. So
I think is that the one happening next Thursday?
30th.
Yeah, because I think
30th,
we
yes.
got information about that. I'm signed up for that.
Great. Good.
And I'd be happy to do, I would look forward to doing the municipal finance training sessions.
Right. And also the one that Carrie mentioned is really good because it focuses on Concord.
Yeah.
So that was really, to me, that was a big help for me when I was new to the board. So great. Thank you.
There's a session next week.
Yes, there's a session next week that's put on by the Mass Association of School Committees, and it's specific to, actually, it was designed for people who are on school committees, but Laurie Hunter gave us permission to listen in and so that we and the Finance Committee could learn about the schools, because schools are complex. The finances are well, the whole town is complex, but the schools have their own accounts. And
Would somebody mind forwarding me that?
I can do that. Kathy.
It's Wednesday the 30th at 5:30 Zoom.
Excuse me?
It's Wednesday the 30th at 5:30 via Zoom.
Oh, Wednesday. Okay.
Wednesday?
I will send you the information, and I'll give you the.
Okay.
Yes, it
Thank
is.
you.
Yeah, it is Wednesday.
Yeah, it would.
how to join and the password and everything. Okay, I will definitely do that. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is the annual town meeting review with the moderator. I see Carmen's here. First of all, I need to say that I think I speak on behalf of the entire Finance Committee when I say that you just did an outstanding job at last year.
Carmen.
Really, I know you say it took a village, but you were the lead, and it was the best town meeting I've ever been at. So thank you for that.
Can you hold every, can you hold every consecutive one outdoors, please?
In 3 hours.
Exactly.
That was amazing. So
Yeah.
Carmen, what would you like to do? Would you like to hear any feedback from individuals, or how would you like to?
Sure. I think that, I was prepared to think, and I didn't do a survey this year because I thought, this is such a one-off, there's not going to be much that we're going to want to carry forward from this. I was mostly extremely grateful for the understanding, cooperation, and willing participation of all of our voters in the unusual procedures that we had for town meeting this year. Folks were really on board and came to do the town's business, and that was a really good thing. However, we may be in this position again for our next town meeting, because it doesn't look like this COVID situation is resolving anytime promptly. With that in mind, I think we certainly have to prepare ourselves for another outdoor town meeting. I'll be delighted to talk with you a little bit about what the current tentative planning is looking like for that. And the select board is going to take it up at their meeting on Monday and make some decisions about dates and a calendar, but I can tell you where things are tentatively in terms of discussion. So I'd be very interested to hear feedback from you all on what you thought worked well, what you thought we could have done better with for purposes of potentially another outdoor town meeting.
Anybody have anything you'd like to?
I do. I like the 1 minute limit, Carmen. I thought that worked. I know we usually maybe do 3 minutes, but I thought that worked. I felt like we really had good discussion on the right topics, the ones that people had a lot of interest in, but it didn't go on forever. I thought it was really efficient. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Carmen, this is Brasher. I like the fact that we had a lot of items on the consent calendar. And I guess I'm not, maybe to take a look at that and try to determine whether we really can continue that regardless of the future circumstances, because people didn't seem to object too much. And that might have helped shorten the length of the meeting. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the other thing is if we do it outside on a sunny day, can we provide chaise lounges?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be a little worried that people would be napping, I don't want that.
But that's why we have a moderator to wake us up.
That was happening anyway. So there were a few that were sneaking in a little cat
nap.
I'm sorry, I didn't actually hear either one of you. Brian, you started, and then Andrea.
No, I was just saying there were a few folks in the audience that were sneaking in a cat nap.
Yeah, that's always true. Yeah. Andrea?
I'll second the 1 minute. My only question is there any way to anchor the umbrellas a little better?
More sandbags. Yeah, that was a lesson learned. Greg?
So could this was my second annual town meeting. I've been in the town for 3 years, and last year's town meeting, I believe, had an overwhelming turnout because of a certain article on the ballot being the middle school. What compare this year's with the COVID to? I'll just say the average. Was it a good turnout, below turnout? Curious in that sense from obviously people that have been in the town much longer than I have.
Well, we get a lot of variance in the attendance at town meeting. And I would say that for the first town meeting, it's probably first night of town meeting, which is typically school and town budget and things that, I mean, it's kind of extraordinary that we appropriate a lot of money on that night, and there's usually, perhaps in large part due to you folks, there's usually not a whole lot of controversy
That's right.
about the articles that are appropriating funds for operations and capital needs of our 3 budget units. And I would say that it's typical on that first night to get about 400 voters. And we had somewhere between 375 and 400. I think we had a couple of things that were higher interest. Junction Village was certainly a controversial item and one that people cared about. Certainly there would have been certainly some people who came specifically because they cared about that issue. And in an ordinary indoor meeting, I think we could have expected a much larger turnout for that issue. But all things considered, I don't feel bad at all about the level of turnout that we had, given the anxiety that people are still feeling about the potential exposure to COVID and the fact that it was a Sunday afternoon. People seem to be informed, and commentary was generally on point and thoughtful. So it felt okay to me as in terms of being a quality town meeting by Concord standards. Let's see, I think I saw Wade next.
I think Dee was first, so I'll defer to her.
I'm so sorry. Sorry,
yeah,
Dee. You were first.
Right.
I was looking at the wrong
Okay.
part of the screen.
So really, I ran into you anyway on the street, so I've already given you my kudos in terms of how well this went. One of the things I think that was very good in foresight was asking for any amendments to come in early and have them available as handouts so people could read them. And I think that was very effective, because we also had the ones that were from the floor, which were a little, I'm trying to figure out how we could make that better, because when you read them, you were very clear in reading what the amendment was, but sometimes, people have to see it also to really understand what this amendment is about. So I don't know how to figure. I don't know what we can do differently, because the electronic item, the things that you had, the timers that you had didn't work because of the sun.
Sam.
So I'm not sure what you could do about that. Anyway, I think that though having those ahead of time was very helpful. And also minimizing, as Chris was saying, it was very just efficient. The meeting was efficient, and 3 hours is better than 3 or 4 nights.
Yeah.
So that's
the amendment issue is a hard one, because it is so much easier for us to follow along with a proposed amendment if we can see it.
right.
And ideally, we want that in a handout or on a screen where we can read it. And our effort this time around was to minimize how many common touch surfaces we had. So we wanted just a minimum number of things. We wanted the finance committee report, the town report, and the meeting materials, and that's it. Just pick up those 3 things and move on, and without having things that could blow around or things that a lot of people would be touching. We can work harder to try and get the amendments in advance. We can certainly post the amendments online so that people can see them there. I don't know how good the Wi-Fi was for people. Did you all try to log on to the Wi-Fi? Anybody? The Xfinity Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I think I did. And
I
logged on, but I never used the service. I never had any reason to use it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that another thing that we could do if we had effective Wi-Fi available would be to electronically generate an amendment and load it up on the website so that people could see it on Wi-Fi real time in the meeting. But that wouldn't include everybody, because not everyone would come with a
phone or something.
with a smart device that would enable them to do it. And I don't know if we had a large number of people all trying to get on at the same time, if the Wi-Fi would handle it. It's a tough problem. That one is a tough problem.
One thing, what about the transcriber that we've had in the past?
So we didn't have the transcriber because that also relies on a screen, which no one was going to be able to see.
You can't see on that screen? Okay.
No.
All right.
Wade, did you have something you wanted?
Pretty much that was my, he stole my fire. I was thinking that it would have been nice to have the amendments online. I think almost everybody has a smartphone. I mean, we can't assume that everyone has technology, but I would assume that 90% of the people and plus would have access to technology. And if you put the amendments on a Google Drive and made them available, that would have been helpful.
Right. So I will say that, we had 2 amendments in advance, one of which became part of the main motion, so it was not an amendment. The second amendment that we had in advance was presented, but it wasn't presented to us advance enough to get it into the meeting materials. So it still required us to read it. And then we had 2 where the amendments showed up on the floor. And that is the right of voters. If they want to make an amendment from the floor, that is their right. And if that's what they do, there's not a whole lot that we can do about that.
Great. Okay. While we have you here, Carmen, let's talk now about next year's town meeting. Carmen has talked to the select board already about possibly postponing town meeting until late May, early June, right? And I've got a calendar, a proposed calendar that we can take a look at. So we can give feedback on that if we want to. But more importantly for us to decide tonight is, what do we want to do about integrating the guideline process with this revised calendar? Because if we're required to have a guideline published by November 30th, we can debate whether we want to move that, or if we even can. But we typically have a guideline published by November 30th on the assumption that we're going to have an late April town meeting. Well, now if we move the town meeting out 5 weeks, what does that mean as far as publishing the guideline? And more importantly, what does it mean as far as the guideline process, which is the conversation that we engage in with both the schools and the town as far as what budget they're going to actually bring to town meeting? Dean?
I think it's more driven, Mary, by when the warrant would close. So if we decide that we're going to move the town meeting out until late May, early June, the warrant probably would not close until late February,
Okay.
So I would say that is more of the driver. Like if you have a warrant that's going to close the first week of January, then we have to get the guideline closed out by the end of November. It gives us a month for the warrant to be finalized and people to get their articles just tuned up the way they, so it makes sense for us to be doing it in November when we have a warrant that closes at the beginning of the year. But you move everything out 2 months, I'd assume we should shift ourselves as well.
Okay. Good segue. Let me share my screen, okay?
Yep.
See if I can get this. Where it is.
Mary, while you do that, do we have a sense of
sharing the
how
screen,
the town, do we have a sense of how the town and the school departments are going to be adjusting their planning if town meeting moves? Or are they still sticking to the original schedule just to be safe?
I can speak to that. I had a conversation with the town manager and the superintendent and the chair of the select board this morning, along with Jared Stanton, the CFO, and we discussed what would happen to their budget planning exercise if we did push out town meeting. And I think their expectation is that they would take advantage of the very much needed time to see a little bit more about how things unfold in these unusual circumstances. The schools are in a position where they don't know how long they will be in this hybrid situation of remote and in person. And if they're doing, or if they end up having to do everything remotely. And it seems that the remote exercise maybe costs actually less money than the in-person exercise, especially because the in-person exercise requires extra spacing, extra cleaning, PPE, just all kinds of things. And so there's a lot of unknowns for them at the moment. And one would certainly hope that things will become a little clearer in the next few months. And the town is in kind of a similar situation. And also nobody knows what the state is going to do in terms of state aid. And it's still a little difficult to say exactly what will happen with revenues of various kinds. So, we're still going to end up, no matter what happens, whenever the warrant closes, I think we can expect this year that the numbers are going to change between the time the warrant closes and the time we get to town meeting, because the circumstances are going to change. But at least if we push the warrant out a little bit and the hearings out a little bit, we'll be a lot closer to a complete picture and solid information for voters by the time we get to town meeting. But there's going to be bumps in this road this year.
And Carmen, there's no desire to push it past the June 30th as we did this year?
I think there's a strong desire not to do that and to get into the 1/12 budget exercise. I think there's a strong desire to have town meeting early enough in June that, you can have your appropriations ready to go by July 1st. And I think, Carrie, am I correct that as soon as town meeting has concluded and dissolved, that the free cash appropriations can be spent? Is
That's correct. There's also no legislative authority that would allow us to have a 1/12 budget yet for fiscal 22. That was special this year.
That was a one-off. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to share my screen, but I will tell you, Dee, you're right. It depends on when we should back up from when the warrant closes. So assuming that the select board were to adopt the calendar that Carmen has put together, the warrant would close on the first week of March. So if we backed up, we would be publishing a guideline about January 24th, the last week of January. And then we would have the conversations with the town and the schools in time for them to get together their budgets to put it on the warrant.
Yeah, so the only issue with that is that those conversations start to happen during a holiday interval. So it's, just
that's true.
Sort of unfortunate, but it is what it is.
That's true. I think it's better I personally think it's better to have it during a holiday with better information than it is to have it way back in October when there's even more unknowns. We're going to have to put together a guideline, and we're going to have to put together budgets with a lot of unknowns this year, and we're going to have to be much more flexible, I think, than we have been in the past. I want to bring this up to people. According to Anita, there is a bylaw that says that we have to publish the guideline November 30th. But there's an argument we could make that was basically done with the assumption that town meeting was going to be held in April, as it had been held for years. And given the fact that we're under very unusual circumstances, we could make an argument that the Finance Committee has the discretion to not publish a guideline until the same number of weeks before the warrant closes. I'm throwing that out there. What do people think about that?
I
think that's totally reasonable.
I think it's completely reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it allows especially the schools to come in with much more certainty on their numbers. That's been a big problem for them in past years. And one of the reasons why we end up with so many last minute revisions and hand wringing, trying to meet our deadlines, and then having just a lack of up-to-date information. So I'd be all for it.
So I'm not a lawyer, but I guess the question is, A, do we have that discretion? And if we don't, maybe we publish guidelines making very clearly we'll update the guidelines in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever it turns out to be.
That's an option as well. Carrie, what do you think?
Well, so the requirement to publish the guideline is actually a town meeting vote. It's not a bylaw. It's a town meeting vote from 1976. And
Right.
just last year, you pushed out publishing the guideline an extra couple of weeks. Obviously, this would be much different, but I think if you put the community on notice that you were going to push this out and then potentially submitted a warrant article to tie the publishing of the guideline to a certain number of days prior to town meeting or the warrant closing, then you would have that flexibility going forward. Because even in the years, town meeting seems to happen either the week before the April school vacation or the week after. And even when it happens the week after, we still are targeting November 30th.
That's a good point.
Able to take advantage of any of that extra time.
Anybody else?
I know Dr. Hunter is in the...
Does FinCom actually draft a warrant to amend that bylaw? I mean, how does that work?
I don't know.
Could I just clarify? Carrie's right. It's not a bylaw. It's called a standing vote because town meeting adopted this. Basically, it's a policy. And that the guideline had to be published prior to November 30th. Just to put it a little in perspective, town meeting back in those days was mainly in March. It was not in April, so it was earlier. So this is a long 44-year-old standing vote, but things have changed since then. And I would say if you wanted to amend it, it should come back to undo this vote. Somehow you'll have to, I'm not a lawyer either, but I think you'd have to make some statement prior to November 30th about what your intentions are, just so people don't think you're just ignoring it.
Can the select board do something about it?
And not really. It was anything enacted by town meeting has to be undone by town meeting or amended. So that really town meeting authority is really over many of these others. But
Anita, the select board could be the body that actually puts the warrant on for future flexibility with the guideline date. Not this year's, but right. So
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Or it could be you, but or it could be the moderator.
Yes. Okay.
So, yeah. I mean, so.
I would say I think from a procedural point of view, I'd rather see the Finance Committee bring the article because. We want a separation of responsibilities and authority between the select board and the finance committee. That's the reason the moderator appoints the finance committee. That's why our charter is set up that way. The moderator doesn't ever bring an article. I mean, I suppose I could because this is within my appointing authority. But I think this is really a policy that the finance committee lives with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you think that it makes more sense to tie this, the point is notice a reasonable amount of time and guidelines a reasonable amount of time before the warrant is closed and before town meeting happens. So it makes a whole lot of sense to peg those things to each other so that when one moves, the other can also. And I don't think that anybody would be unhappy. It's just so patently reasonable for you to do that. And as long as there's plenty of notice and plenty of statement out there about what your plan is, and that you plan to formalize this common sense rule by putting it in front of town meeting, you sure could do that.
How do you go about making a change between town meetings?
Well, you really can't.
So we would have to stick with, for this year, we'd have to stick with the
So
November.
my suggestion is stick with it. My suggestion would be that we publish something on November 30th, but we make a statement that this is subject to revision and that we intend to revise it. I mean, we meet the objective standard of publishing something, and then we can come back and say, you know, we're still working on budgets, and this is a very unusual situation, and blah blah. And then we bring an article to town. We put an article of our own on town meeting to get this straightened out.
I think it's a really good suggestion.
You know, we meet the objective standard with a statement that says we intend to revise this within a month of the warrant closing, blah blah. You know, something like that.
So you put out preliminary guidelines.
Well, we really can't call it preliminary because we're supposed to do the guideline.
It's a formal guideline, but I think if you put enough words around it to say that it's going to change, I think that's one possibility.
So
the concern,
Andrea, yeah, go ahead.
So are we saying we can't change it this year?
I think Dean is saying that he would publish a guideline on November 30th per the whatever, and say that this is subject to change. So we've met the letter of the law, and we would also put a warrant up at next town meeting that gives us more flexibility going forward. Did I hear you correctly, Dean?
That's basically my idea. I think we could probably relax our two-step process then this year of doing a preliminary guideline followed by the November final guideline. We could do the November final guideline and then say this is subject to be revised, and could be treated, so to speak, as a preliminary guideline. You know, it's just a bunch of semantics at some point, at some level. But, you know, there is a rule. We're supposed to do something, so we probably ought to do what we're supposed to do. Carmen had to move. She had to work the same, you know, kind of magic with moving the date of town meeting. She was constrained by a law that had been passed, you know, an exceptional rule that said you can move it, you know, 90 days or 30 days at a time. And so she had to, you know, push it out multiple times. We can do the same sort of thing. We can say, here's a guideline, and we intend to revise this. You know, we'll do our best. Yeah.
But Dean, what would our process?
Wait. I see D.
That's all right. Chris, did you?
No, my question was to Dean. So what, you know, we normally have this process that operates in October, November that gives us the information to decide the guidelines. So would we not have that process and wait until after and then sort of do the guideline, you know, by ourselves essentially without input?
It kind of feels like we would kind of slide that process until a point where, you know, none of those entities are going to have that much, you know, Lori's on the call right now. They're not going to know very much. So it would almost be like, you know, sort of a dog and pony show that doesn't really get you anything. And then you have a very false sense of having done something, but it's not, it just would be a lot of
But publishing a guideline that isn't informed might have that same problem. So that's what I'm worried about a bit.
It's all you're right about that as well, Chris. I'm not saying this is a perfect thing. It's not great.
Dee, what do you think?
I do think that there are a couple issues. One would be, I do believe that we need to continue to have not necessarily all the conversations we've had with both the town and the schools, but I think we need to engage with them before we just come up with a guideline, just to see where they're at, really how much more work we're all going to have to do. The other thing is I'm kind of curious in terms of how we're going to be establishing the guideline. How much work and how much effort is it going to take on our part ahead of time? And how reliable is the information we're going to be using at this point in time in establishing the guidelines? So I have those two concerns about, I'm all on board with the November 30th. You come up with a guideline knowing that it's going to change. But I think that we better establish a game plan ahead of time in terms of how we're going to get from tonight to that point.
We will.
And how we're going to engage others.
Thank you. Carmen.
I just want to say I'm very happy to put the question to town council on what kind of latitude the finance committee has, given this standing vote of town meeting on a policy, and whether you could change it within within this town meeting cycle, or whether you would need to really wait and, as Dean suggests, at least observe the technical details, even understanding that it needs to be revised later. I mean, it would clearly be a lot better to proceed the way you usually do at the point when the information is ready. So why don't I do that? I'll copy Kerry and we'll check in with town council and send him the relevant materials and just put the question to him of what kind of latitude you have, and we'll report back to you.
What do people think?
I think that's a good idea.
That sounds fun.
So I think we maybe, I'm curious whether we're making a mountain out of a molehill with respect to whatever we publish at the end of November. If we've got the latitude to update it, I mean, at the end of the day, we could have some, if we're working 100% to get to November 30th, maybe we put in 20% of the effort by, in essence, putting out a number that's equivalent to this year. Talk a little bit to Lori, talk a little bit to Steve, maybe up or down a little bit, but you're putting it out there more to meet the letter of the law, with the real work to go on later, right? If we've got that flexibility. So I guess I wouldn't get too worked up about how do we determine that number, more as long as everybody clearly understands that it's going to be revised with a true number to come out later.
Well, true number might be a stretch. Maybe a better number might be a better number. I don't know. I personally, I heard what Chris said about why publish a number in November that's not really an informed number. I guess I'm thinking more, if we can, I would rather wait and publish a guideline that's more informed and shift the whole process out 4 or 5 weeks.
Oh, I would certainly prefer that. I mean, I was just suggesting something that, if we.
Yes, I understand. We check the box. Yes, yeah, exactly. I understand. Yep. So I guess what I'm hearing, if anybody doesn't object, so Carmen, you'll get back to us and let us know. So procedurally, should we have a motion that if we're able to slide that, we would slide the publishing of the guideline out?
Why do we?
I think we can wait on that. Let's wait until
when's our next?
The select board decides next week.
It's next week, yeah.
Okay. And our next meeting was scheduled for October 8th, which is when we were supposed to start the guideline process. We were supposed to have people in to talk about the guideline. Right. So we can meet on the 8th and decide then how we want.
Just for the sake of asking the question you probably all know, I just want to clarify. So, and I think Anita was talking, requires a standing vote. Does that basically mean we can't take a special interim vote on this, or is that even required? Is that even possible to get this thing locked down, or is that completely out of the question because it's too much of a lift? Because I just don't see the point in making up a guideline. We're sitting here in a public session basically saying we're going to make a number up and then we're not going to follow it. And that doesn't make any sense to me. So we're on record as basically saying, well, we're going to publish something, but we're really not going to take it seriously. So because we just don't have enough information. So what are we actually doing? Are we going to follow the law? Or are we not going to follow the law?
I think
Along that line, I'd like to hear from Chris, since she's in charge of guidelines this year. How would you give us your thoughts on how you might want to proceed with this?
Under which scenario, Dee?
Under the scenario that town meeting is going to be at the end of May, that we do publish something in November because we have to at this point in time until Carbon gets it solidified. But that how would you like to proceed as the guidelines chair in terms of looking at what we have to do to create a guideline, and then also how we want to outreach to the town and the schools?
Right. Well, if we have to publish something by November 30th, then I think you could sort of do guidelines light a bit, but you'd still need, the biggest factor for us is going to be the state and local revenue projections. That's the biggest impact on the budget. And so that, to me, is the biggest number for us to get estimates on. So I would have to have a conversation with Kerry to say how good do we feel about that. So by September, by the end of this month, the state will have 6 months of experience, or almost 6 months of experience with COVID. I don't know how long it takes us to get 930, or I guess for them, fiscal first quarter revenue. We have the fourth quarter from 2020. So that timing matters to me a lot about the revenue side. On the expense side, I feel like we have a lot of data that we can make some projections with a little bit of information from the schools and the town, right? The primary driver we know is salary and benefits. So if we can get a range from them on what they think growth might be there, we can crank the numbers to say, what do we think expenses are going to grow by? And if we have a projection on revenue, we'll have a picture of what we might end up with for needing in terms of raising of taxes. And so I think we can do it, but it would be light because we wouldn't have the same benefit of the 2 sessions we have with the town and the 2 sessions we have with the schools to really explain to us what's going on. But I think we could come up with a number. I do.
On November 3rd.
Then you do it again, essentially. You'd have 2 processes. And, we did this last year. Of course, we didn't know we were going to run into it. We spent a whole lot of time using our normal process. And then we had to come back in the summer and, essentially from July and August, mostly August, and just crank through it to really get to the answer. So I'd much rather do it once than twice if I could. But we could do it.
Actually, what happened last year, though, is that we did do the full process. And then when COVID hit, what happened is that the process kind of took on a life of its own. And if you remember, we weren't meeting. And so the budgeting committees, the budgeting entities talked amongst themselves, and then we were presented with something. So I would much rather stay in the conversations during the whole time,
right,
and have meaningful conversations. So I'm a proponent of delaying the guideline if we can.
Does that answer your question, Dee?
Thank you. It did.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see. The way it's proceeding now is, Carmen, you're going to find out if we can, and then the select board will meet next week and decide on the revised calendar, and then the finance committee, when we meet on October 8th, will decide how we want to move forward with this. Does that work? Does anybody object to that? Andrea, yes.
Dr. Hunter, do you have any input on this from the schools? On this discussion?
Yeah, I was mostly here to listen, which never actually works, but I know better at this point. We're going to talk with the school committee. We haven't started this conversation, but I just wanted to hear what you were all thinking. And, having had Carmen represented quite well what we talked about earlier, we feel like we're in a complete void right now of having any basis to build this budget. We have no revenue numbers. There's no sense from the state. They're not even talking about FY22 around us right now. And then just in terms of not having, we're 2 weeks into the school year, not knowing which direction this is going to go. And the more time we get with this model and see how the virus is going to play out and impact us, if we can get into the middle of the year and we stayed open, that's a really big piece of information versus if we get into November and we're shut down again. It's still going to be a challenging budget to build, but some of it playing out a little would be better than trying to do much of anything right now. We're already behind what we would normally be doing because normally we're way deep into the budget build, and we all just finished FY20. We still have a special town meeting in Carlisle, October 17th to finish FY21. So they aren't talking about 22 at all yet. So just frame of reference there. So all the time we can get is going to be helpful to get you a better budget. The goal I have is to not build it twice like we did last year, some of what you were just talking about. And you're saying all the right things, and the intent is flexibility and knowing things are going to be hard to pin down. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm sure we'll figure this out. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody wants to?
Yeah, I have one question for Carmen if she's about to leave the meeting. Carmen, our town ended up being a town where the warrant was published, and it put us in this box of having to constantly push it out 30 days at a time or whatever. But many other towns they had not published their warrant, and they don't. Why are we so different that we are so far, our warrant gets closed and then we have months and months before our meeting is actually held? Is that rare? Are we in a group of towns that does it that way, or why are we different than, say, Carlisle, where they just didn't even publish their warrant? They didn't close the warrant.
Well, that's such a good question, Dean. But there's 300 something town meetings in Massachusetts, and there's 300 something ways of doing it.
Okay.
And our process in Concord has been pretty formalized for a lot of years, where we open the warrant, we keep it open for 30 days, we close the warrant, we send it to everybody's house, and then we have 5 hearings. Nobody has 5 hearings in other towns on all of these articles that are in the warrant. And there's this robust process that, you have to have that warrant kind of set by the time you're having hearings on it, so you know what you're having hearings on. And normally it works pretty well. This year, it was a nightmare, and I issued 5 declarations of recess and continuance in order to get town meeting to where it ultimately happened. But it is a thing that I thought about, Dean, was, what if we just didn't actually post the warrant and we hung on to it for a while? Maybe we could have, but if you're going to give it to the citizenry, it needs to be in a final posted form. You can't have multiple versions of it floating around.
Right.
And then go on to hearings and have it change. It's hard to see how we would change it to make it better. What we can do is push the warrant opening and closing out, and push our annual town meeting out as far as we comfortably can, and still do it inside June 30th. And hopefully, barring another disaster like we've had this year, we'll be good. And I think even if we are in the grips of a real resurgence of COVID at the beginning of June, I think the methodology that we found to hold our town meeting will still be okay. It was really very protective of public health, and I think we could do it again, even if we were in the grips of more of a spread. So that's what we can do, I think.
Thanks. It just seemed sad that we had to constantly have these declarations of continuance, and Carlisle was just sitting there like, yeah, we're good. We haven't closed our warrant yet. We're okay. We're fine.
Yeah. We weren't alone, Gene. There were other people pushing their town meetings along, as was I. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Before you leave, Brian.
I just have for Carmen, this declaration of continuance, is that specific to the town meeting, or that seems like a really nice tool that we might want to deploy with the guideline?
Oh yeah, no, it's specific to town meeting. So we have a specific statutory authorization for posted town meetings and it was amended this year to allow the moderator to move a posted town meeting to another date within 30 days of the originally posted date for weather or public safety emergency. And this year, the legislature added public health. So we can only do it for 30 days at a time. And in the normal case, you've got to do the meeting by June 30th. But this year we had special legislation that allowed us to push our meetings out past June 30th. So it is a unique thing, a vehicle only for town meeting.
One more question for Carmen. Carmen, you were talking about the hearings, and we have all these 5 different hearings and all. And I'm wondering, because the Finance Committee generally talks with someone who has an article prior to even the hearings, would you be able to give us some suggestions if in pushing everything back, how we could proceed to maybe help us think differently about streamlining some of the work we're doing plus the hearings? Would you like to take that on, Carmen?
I'm happy to have a conversation with, Mary, Christine, if you guys want to talk about that, I'm happy to brainstorm with you. Sure.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that was the review of the calendar. That was to be continued. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I wanted to suggest that perhaps we change the time of our meetings from 7 to something earlier. And I wanted to know if that would inconvenience anyone significantly. So I'm thinking of changing it from so Brian, that's
well,
you.
First of all, I want to acknowledge, I am challenged to begin with, just given my schedule. Moving it up, if we were continuing to work remotely, could possibly work. But if I'm back at work physically next year, it could be very, very challenging for me personally.
Okay, so remote would be possible, but not if we go once we return.
Mary, a few years ago, we moved the start time of the meeting from 7:30 to 7. And my hope was that it would get us out earlier, and it didn't. I'm just saying, it's not going to, you could start the meeting at 6 and we would still end up going to 9:30 or 10.
God.
So that's my humble opinion.
So the later we start, the shorter the meeting.
Yes. Oddly enough, yes.
Well, I didn't even think of that. Should we move it to 9?
Yeah.
How about with 9 o'clock, but with 1 minute timer?
There you go. That's
Get a
right.
big consent calendar. It'll all just be consent calendar.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else would have a serious problem? Okay. So Dick, I hear what you're saying. It's just that one of the reasons I think of one of the advantages of moving it up sooner isn't that we get out sooner, even though you would expect that, but it would be less of a burden on some of our support staff. That's
a good point. It just makes it difficult for those of us who have to get from Boston back to Concord. Of course, that's assuming that we're meeting in.
You're going to Boston.
Even if I were doing in Zoom, I'd have to either do it from Boston or get home in time to do it from home. I think Brian might run into the same problem.
Okay. Anybody else? Greg?
I just have a challenge with young ones. So, they're finishing up sports or whatever. So pushing it up for me would make it a little bit challenging.
Okay. Phil, did I see your hand?
Yes, I have to, when we're back at work in our offices, I would have to be coming out from Boston too. So that would make it hard for me. But I'm only on this for 1 more year, so don't really pay much attention to me.
Anybody else? Yeah.
It would be harder if we start much earlier than 6, for me personally, because I've got a company out of the West Coast. But I guess the other question I have for many of us is there a way to figure out whether we can participate via Zoom or dial in? So for folks coming in, maybe dialing in on the way back, at least by phone. I don't know if that's a possibility beyond these COVID times.
Well, there is something written about that. About I think it's limited to one person per meeting or something. It's been codified. But if you remember once, Parashar, you called
Right.
it, and I frankly I didn't find that we really took advantage of your participation as much as we are right now. Did you feel that way?
Well, I purposefully didn't speak up too much because I was the only one. Number one, via Zoom makes it a lot easier. But at least for me in my professional life, people dialing in on phones is routine. So,
although my experience is if I'm on the phone and somebody's doing a screen share, I can't see it.
I understand, but I'm just saying, if it's for a half hour, 45 minutes, so whatever. But I was just sort of putting that out there as a potential compromise.
To the chair, and Parshar, I agree with Parshar on this. What's really interesting about this is actually an opportunity for us to kind of really re-underwrite how the process actually works. This idea about the guideline, now this idea about Zoom calls and maybe standardizing these things. Maybe we should sort of be collectively trying to make these changes now. If you wanted to move it up to 6 o'clock and I could Zoom in, that's a game changer in many ways. If I need to physically be there, I'm just gonna run into a whole world of problems. And I know that attendance is crucial, especially during guideline. So just food for thought. So Zoom would be great, and I would love to.
I appreciate that, Brian.
Can we change it? Can we go? I mean, we know we're going to be on Zoom for a while.
Yeah.
Seems that way.
Can we make it a little earlier? And then if we need to change it, go ahead and change it. Can we do that?
Carrie, I'm going to look to you. How frequently can we be changing meeting times?
I think anytime you post an agenda, we maintain a calendar, and the town clerk's office includes on the calendar any meetings that they know of, and they'd like to go out as far as they could, but you have the ability anytime you meet to post a different meeting time.
Okay. Chris.
So the timing, I assume, is, as Carrie says, we can control, but the Zoom, just like the discussion about how many people can be on a phone call, I think that's a state rule, and I think that's the way towns operate. So I don't think we're going to be able to change the Zoom business. If we decided post-COVID we would like to have people Zoom in, I don't think we can do that on our own.
I agree with that.
We're stuck.
There are going to be state rules about that.
The state rules on what you do for a town meeting.
Yeah. I think, Kathy.
Just as a piece of information, the October meeting dates, as far as starting and ending, for those who it might matter to them, the presidential debates will be starting those nights at 9 o'clock. So it's the 15th and the 22nd will be presidential debates starting at 9.
Well, then we have a reason to want to get out the door.
That's right. Exactly.
I didn't know if that mattered to people.
I'd rather watch the debates here.
Remind us.
No more or less than a World Series date might have mattered in the past.
I was going to say, I remember a few baseball games. There was pressure on us to leave early.
Dee, what would you like to say?
I just have a question about going forward. Say come January, we're back at meetings in live time.
Yeah.
Who do we have to talk with, or how do we figure out being able to Zoom in addition to that?
I think it's the town clerk. Carrie.
We can talk to our town clerk about how we can have both Zoom participation and in-person participation.
If that's allowed. Carrie, where would I go for that answer? Where would we go?
So, yeah, I think we would need to take a look at the COVID legislation to see if there's anything in there that would extend once we get out of COVID in terms of the remote meetings.
I mean, the person who would be on the call or would be in the meeting remotely, they're right in your face, you know? So they're actually live. It's not like it's a telephone call. So I don't see really what the difference is between being seated in a room and being zoomed in. So that would be, you know, and I don't know, who do you go to talk to about that?
Well, I might have misunderstood your question, but I thought you were asking, once we are allowed to be in a room together,
right,
what would indicate if there's a limit on the number of people who could join remotely, whatever the technology is?
Well, I think we have to differentiate the technology. If, you know, in the past, apparently it's one person on a phone line, right? But Zoom is very different than just participating on a phone line.
Carrie.
So there is a remote participation policy, and the policy essentially says that you cannot, you have to have a quorum present. So it's not that you can only have one person remote. You just can't have a person participating remotely make a quorum.
But don't the people that are participating remotely, they lose their vote or something to that effect? Or did I misunderstand?
No.
I voted last time.
The person participating remotely doesn't count in terms of the quorum. I would love to know what the rules are there, because they're totally different for participation in board meetings, where the law usually provides that as long as that people can participate remotely, so long as they can see and be heard by all of the other participants. So, if the law may be different, there may be specific rules that apply to town committees or policies that have been adopted by this town committee. But as a general matter, you can participate in a board meeting and qualify as part of the quorum, as long as you're participating by a technological means that lets you hear everything that's going on and be heard.
Do I have somebody want to take this as an action item to find out more about what?
I'll look at it.
Would you look at it, Dean?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that could be that may become important for me at some point, because I have historically over the last couple of years spent, and Carmen knew this, spent big chunks of the winter in New York, but could obviously be participating in all of the meetings by Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I come back regularly. It's not that I disappear completely. I just am down for chunks of time. So I would really like to know that. And it might be helpful in terms of scheduling and timing. It might be preferable to do the meetings even earlier. If it means you can start the meeting at 5:30 or 6. You just stay in your office and then drive home afterward.
Yes.
Mary, can I interject here real quick?
Please.
One thing, if we all don't remember here, is there had to be a reason for it. Personal illness, personal disability, military service. It wasn't an option of like, I am just going to do this.
Oh, okay.
Right.
It wasn't a free thing to do. There had to be a reason for it.
All right.
Okay.
Interesting.
So that's the big thing there. And can we divert back to time of the meeting rather than what's going to happen post-COVID? Because
I volunteered to look into this. I think the first place I'll start is the open meeting law and the regs there, which I think, Greg, you were kind of quoting more or less from. But then I'll also try to overlay that with what the new rules have been based on some of the legislation that was passed. And I'll come back at the next meeting and tell you what we can do and what we can't.
Great. All in the light of moving the time of the meeting.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Okay. The next thing on our agenda is, I put this on here, it's debt service. The reason I put that on there is I think that I would like to take a little deeper dive into debt. About 1.5 years ago, Carrie put together this great schedule that showed us what was going to happen to property tax bills if the middle school came in at between 80 to 100 million. That was done 1.5 years ago. And so one of the things would be great to update that. The other thing I noticed is that debt takes up 10% of our budget right now, and that might not seem like a lot, but it is a lot, and it's going to go up. The other thing we've got going is the Long Range Planning Committee, which hopefully at some point will develop a way to time and prioritize and cost out large capital projects. So I think all these things come together to kind of demand that we get a better understanding of debt and a better way to understand what debt's going to do to our property tax going forward as we build more buildings. So I'm looking for any volunteers that would like to set up a subcommittee, and it would be, this is not going to be I'm not envisioning this as a long-term project. I think we could probably get it done in a few weeks. So if anybody is interested in doing that with me, I would welcome your help. So if you'd like to do that, please email me, and we'll try to get a closer look. And obviously I'm going to be working closely with Kerry on that. Any thoughts, comments on that? Any ideas about how we should do it, shouldn't do it?
So Mary, I'll volunteer since I'm the liaison to the long-term capital planning committee.
Okay, great. Thank you, Parsha. Anybody else?
Sure.
Great, thank you, Dee. That's a subcommittee. Great, thank you. Okay, I'd like to go around now and hear observer reports. So I know that most of you are attending these things via Zoom or watching the recording later on. And if you would just share with us anything of financial significance that you're picking up by observing these committees, we would love to hear that. I'm just going to go around and start with the screen. Christine, anything happening with CPC?
You're mute.
No.
No.
They've had two meetings.
Yep.
And the second one, which was on the 15th, they really had a bunch of folks come with their preliminary view of requests. So there were sort of two real big categories. One is the First Parish Church is looking to do some work on Wright Tavern, the Wright Tavern that they own. And that building needs a lot of things. And really, it's beyond the building. They're really going off as a group. They have a subcommittee to look at what the future should be of Wright's Tavern and how it should be used. So how it could be used in the community. Is it a museum? Is it something that they could work with the Park Service on? So they want to have a vision for the future of that building and how it can be better integrated into the national and Concord's history. So it's an important building where some important meetings were held a long time ago, pre-revolution. And it looks like they're still formulating their budget, but they have a series of projects that they are going to start with that are infrastructure related. They're going to run somewhere between 500 and 700,000. Again, they haven't made the request yet to CPC. They were just giving them the prelims, and it's around fixing the roof, working on the sprinkling needs to be done to better insulate the attic. And they have second floor HVAC. So they have a bunch of things they need to do to make that building safe. So that's one of the larger applications that was discussed. And then the second one was the town. So the town always comes forward with some projects as well that they would like some help with from a funding perspective from CPC. And the most of the projects you will recognize, they are continuances of other ones that they've asked for funds on. So Warner's Pond dredging is in there for $250,000, White Pond beachfront and stormwater improvements, $300,000. A new one is applying some conservation restriction to some property that's over where Ralph Emerson's cottages on over by the pond. So they have a couple of pieces of land they want to get restricted for conservation over there. And then there's a bunch of smaller things, but those are the main things that they talked about at their most recent meeting.
So, Chris, did they talk at all about the matching, what they expect the matching to be?
They didn't. So it seemed to me, so the first meeting was very, very preliminary. That was more, talking about what their goals were for the year. The second meeting, they really had petitioners come in. But then there was a lot of questioning by the members of CPC of the different projects. They did talk about how much they had spent in the prior year, which was about 1.9 million, but they didn't come out and say, hey, here's our budget for the current year. So I didn't hear that, Mary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. D.
Is that D or Dean?
D. I'm
Hey,
going.
schools.
D.
Schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Schools.
Schools. All right. So a couple of pieces of information. The schools are winding down, and they maybe have closed it out, the one-year contract, with teacher contract that they had for this past year, or the year we're in now. And then not before January will they start in the long 3-year contracts. That process will begin no earlier than January, and it will probably be somewhat of a long process that they'll be working on. The middle school building committee actually will start up again in October. That's what they talked about at the last meeting. The representative from the schools, the school committee, who will be watching our meetings is Cynthia Rainey, and then Sarah, who is from Carlisle, is the chair of the region, and she will participate in the regional meeting for the region at meetings with the budgets, where the budgets are concerned. One of the things I did want to bring up is that Lori the superintendent talked about the number of students in school. And I just wanted to relay these numbers for a specific reason. At the high school, the total number of students is 1,325. I think that we should all be aware of that, because I believe when the high school was built, the capacity was in the 1,200 and something range. Maybe somebody has better information than I do, but I think that they're kind of getting to their capacity at the high school. The middle school has 694, and the elementary school has, I think I have the total. It'll be the difference between those two numbers and the total, which is 3,301 total students. What was also described was that the number of students who signed up to be in education remotely was 458 students. That's across high school, middle school, and elementary school. But I did want to focus on the number of students at the high school. I think I'll do a little investigating on that in terms of going back and looking at capacities. It might have some implications in the future. Other than that, schools are open, and some of the students who were scheduled to be remote, their parents are already asking if they can come to school rather than just be remote. And what's interesting is that the complexity of how to get that student to school, because the way that the classes are structured, they have, they have to be socially distanced. And so trying to find room for one more student, whether it's to take the bus or whether it's to be in a classroom, it's a logistical issue. So I think that it's interesting to see really and these are just seemingly minor things that the schools have to address, but it's kind of just this whole, the fluid nature of education right now. And that's about it.
So Dee, can I ask you a question about the teacher's contract?
Yeah.
So they've settled a 1-year contract?
They had a 1-year contract so that, and I don't know for what level, but they had a contract that they only did for 1 year because they wanted to get all the contracts on the same schedule.
Right.
So the 1-year contract, I guess, has now been finished, or it was in the process of being finished. And then with that one finished, then they can look at all of the schools on the 3-year calendar, the 3-year structure. And so they won't be addressing those 3-year contracts any earlier than January at the earliest.
Okay.
Forming the committees that look, and do the negotiations.
But right now, I thought they had just signed a 1-year contract that had a 1.75 COLA.
Well, maybe.
Does that jive with what you've heard as well?
I didn't hear anything about the COLA at the last meeting. All I know is that the 1-year contract, whatever it included, was in its final format at that point in time. And the meeting was, I don't know, a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Dee, I have one question for Dee.
Yep.
Dee, are you aware of whether or not they still have a budget subcommittee that meets?
I am not aware of that, if they have a budget committee that still meets.
We had asked them to do it 2 years ago, and they turned it into a benchmark committee. John Hickling and I both participated in that. And then I think the second year of it, I think it was more budget focused. It was more focused on, just keeping track of where things were going and how they were doing against their goals. But I'm not sure if it's still meeting, that's all.
So are you talking about a budget committee as a subcommittee of the school committee?
Yes. Yeah, we had asked them.
All right.
We'd asked them to put one together, and they did. But I don't know how much energy they're putting behind that.
Okay, I'll contact.
Yeah.
Do you think they need that still?
I think it's less critical.
Yeah.
I think it's the thing I think is important is that the school committee members have a very low number of actual responsibilities. And one of them is the financial oversight of the systems. And I don't think that is given very short shrift in their meetings. They spend a lot of time on a lot of other stuff, and finances, it gets, 5 minutes. Here's some budget paperwork. Here we go. And then 5 minutes later, you're done. So I think that a budget subcommittee, which has a regular standing meeting, meets, goes over the budget, sees how they're doing against their goals, would be a good thing for them, but that's their call. They can run their committee the way they want. We just, Yeah.
So this budget subcommittee, your expectation was that they would be down in the weeds in terms of budget information with Jared.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Dee, on the middle school, so the restarting of it in October, does that mean that they're ready to take public input? Because I think that was the big reason for the pause due to COVID. Did they give a rationale for why they're starting again, or?
It was just one of these comments that came up. The middle school is going to start, or the building committee is going to start up again in October. That committee may have to rethink how they're going to go forward, with the timelines, if they want to bring something to the next town meeting or not, a budget to vote on. I don't know.
I think they were planning on a special town meeting in the fall, but Greg, you can shine some light on this.
Greg might know.
I'm going to shine a little bit, but I am not speaking at all for them. All I know is that they're just starting up to see what the next steps are. They need to meet because they haven't talked to each other in a while. They just need to get their ground, their feet together and form a plan. I would not say that we know anything sort of at this point going forward. But they are very concerned about the public input. I know that.
Well, they were
so they're going to be
almost
looking
at
to
that
do.
point, weren't they?
They were
at that
almost
point before.
right, and
Yeah.
they got to discuss, can they do it over Zoom? I don't know all the details for the other two, the new members, Luis and Kathy. Just for full disclosure here, my wife is the chair of the middle school building committee. That's why everybody laughs when I say I have a little bit of insight there. But I literally, they're just meeting to get start up again. So I would not put anything to it right now.
Great, thank you, Greg. Okay, Dick.
My first meeting with the Rec Commission won't be until the 29th, but I have talked with Ryan Kane. And of course, the main challenge they're facing is with the Beatty Center, which is in the unenviable position of being treated as, it's supposed to support itself with its revenue, but unlike municipal light and water and sewer, it does not have a monopoly on customers. So they're really a nonprofit market competing entity, and they're looking at a deficit next year of about 700 some odd thousand, assuming they can get 50% of their members back. They're not there yet. There is some, Ryan said there he does have a little bit of, he budgeted very conservatively, and he's hoping that he'll do a little bit better than that. But they're in a tough position, and so they're eating into the capital reserve that Beatty has. So that this is going to be a challenge for them. It'd be nice if I asked them if that building is a real energy hog, and I asked them if they could put in photovoltaic cells or something like that to help ease the burden. And he said they ran that. They had Brian Folds come in and look at it, and they talked to Concord Municipal Light. Municipal Light says, well, if you put in solar panels, then that end of the grid can't handle it, and we could have brownouts or something. So they're in a tough spot, and I think the town's going to have to support them until business opens back up. The Beatty Center is certainly not alone. I've got some customers with gyms, and it is a very, very tough environment right now. Boston sports clubs went bankrupt. A lot of small gyms are not going to be reopening, or if they have, they're really struggling. And I myself am a loyal member of Beatty, and I go there, and when I'm there, I'm not seeing a lot of other people. So that's going to be a big challenge.
Thank you. Any questions for Dick? No. Okay, Wade, what's going on in all things affordable housing?
So my first meeting is coming up on October 1st, so I've got nothing to report. There was an annual meeting that I couldn't attend on September 15th, so I'll report back at the next meeting.
Who are you? I'm sorry, Wade, who are you meeting? Who's meeting in October? Who will that be?
Housing Authority.
Housing Authority, okay, good. Are you going to also do the Concord Housing Development Corp meetings?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, because they're the ones that are going to shepherd the Junction Village project through, right?
That's correct.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you. Andrea.
I did go to the Council on Aging meeting on Monday, and they did have a quorum. The Minuteman Senior, they've gotten good state funding. Spending was down. They're ramping up again, trying to transition to more face-to-face encounters with seniors. Let's say they've hired 2 outreach workers. They're down. They're having a problem with transportation because a lot of the drivers that they had don't want to come back. they don't feel it's safe. So they're still in transition. The building, the Harvey Wheeler building, is not open yet. There's a concern about the safety of people coming in. They've tried to do online programs, but having people actually come to the building, even on an appointment basis, there's a reluctance to do that. So they're kind of in a holding pattern almost. Not sure how they're going to proceed, given the vulnerability of the population that they serve.
Right.
They are continuing the drive-through meals, and they feel it gets people out. They enjoy coming to pick up the meals, driving by, and they're expanding it to 2 times a week instead of 1 time a week. They're going to have a drive-through flu clinic with a tent. But, other than that, it's getting people to actually come back to work in the building is not there yet. They haven't quite figured out how to do that. And the other committee, the Economic Vitality Committee, I'm still trying to find out who I contact and when they meet and how I can get a Zoom link to that.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Phil, have they finished Concord Turnpike yet?
I don't know. My first meeting with Public Works is next Wednesday.
Oh, good.
So
okay.
I'll report next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Greg.
Board of Health is coming up on the 30th, I think. And then I didn't get to the light plant this past one, so I'll report next meeting.
Great. Good. Yeah, the light plant, I think, is going to be more and more important for many reasons, but one of them is many reasons. Yeah, that's going to be more great. Okay, good.
Apparently to John too, because I think he just took a brown out in his house there.
He takes a brown out every time we meet. It's crazy.
Okay, Dean, what's up?
So I've got 2 disparate things that I'm focused on. One is the middle school building committee. They, as we heard from Greg, are kind of like quiescent. Tim Holt, the other co-chair, did issue a letter indicating, where they are and that they're sort of still standing by. In the letter, they indicated that they would love to be, out at the next town meeting, not creating a special town meeting between now and then, but out at the next town meeting. That's what the letter said. So that's kind of the objective. So if they ramp back up starting in October, they should have time to get themselves to the next town meeting and ready to ask for the funding, for the full funding for the school. So that's the middle school building committee. Otherwise, I know that there are some individuals who are still, looking at and working on spreadsheets and doing other things, but nothing formal on that committee. The other one is the Climate Action Advisory Board. They've met twice. The first time was pre-town meeting, August 24th. And that was by and large just kind of getting ready for town meeting. And it had the unusual characteristic of Brian Folds, the chair, having to step back and change the title underneath his name from chair to just Brian Folds so that he could then advocate for his article for the electric buses. So that was kind of an interesting meeting to watch because there was a dual role there that he had to sort of step out of. But they also met on the 16th, and they're putting together a letter. They have put together a letter for a net zero stretch code, and they're also working with some consultants on an electrification strategy for the community, for the municipal buildings. So those are the things that the Climate Action Advisory Board is working on.
Great.
And those could turn out to be very costly for the community. It's not really discussed, but there also is the study that's going on within the town that Brian had pushed for in Article 31 that he did not move, but that is to electrify the vehicle fleet and what we're going to do about that. So that's also part of the subtext of that committee.
Right. So I got to ask you, Dean, is the school considering, when you say next town meeting, you mean next May, June town meeting?
Yeah, whatever that is, next May, June. It was going to be April, but if we're going to push it out to May, June, that's when they would try to bring it.
Okay, good to know. And then does the Climate Action Advisory Board work with the CMLP at all? What's their relationship?
I talked to Brian about that offline.
Yep.
And it has been, it's not the greatest. It just isn't that great. They have a very fixed kind of worldview at the municipal light plant. And Brian has been, trying over a long period of time to sort of like just turn the Queen Mary around in the harbor a little bit in terms of the way they approach their finances and the way they view electrification and solar and all, numerous things that he would like to see different. But so the relationship is, we'll just call it, cordial, but somewhat strained, probably a little bit. It doesn't get, I don't know. I don't want to speak out of school on it. I'm not that familiar with the relationship, but it doesn't sound like it's all that gung ho between those two committees.
Okay, good, great. Any questions for Dean? Great, okay, Parshar.
So I met, and I guess I'm part of the long-term capital planning task force, took over from Dee. So to level set everybody, it got started last year, or I guess 2019, was chugging along, headed towards a public hearing in March. And then COVID stopped progress in their tracks, I guess, in February. And they've been on hiatus since. And we had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. Long story short, sort of picking up on a draft report that was in the works to present to the public. We're now planning to have 2 public hearings in the next 2 to 3 months to get public input on those, number 1. Number 2, to give you a sense of some decisions made. Sort of split capital planning projects into 3 tiers. Tiers 1 and 2 are ones that are already undertaken by the school departments and the town through their regular operating plan processes, if you will, and then sort of get tucked in as within the operating plan. And then tier 3 is now defined or proposed to be defined as projects over $5 million in cost, regardless of 1 phase or 5 phases. So a couple decisions I think we're going to wrestle with is, do we have a separate, permanent, standing long-term capital planning committee, or do the budget units manage and prioritize projects for town meeting through their regular processes, if you will, and how do you coordinate, et cetera? So those are some of the decisions that we're going to be wrestling with to develop some recommendations for the town. The new deadline is, I think, either end of April or end of June of next year for us to deliver a set of recommendations to the select board. So, and the next meeting is October 3rd, and what I would propose is after that meeting, maybe we invite Elise, who's the chair, the new chair, to come present some of their findings and kind of where we stand to the FinCom, maybe ahead of the public hearings.
It's okay. Do you have dates for the public hearings?
We don't. I believe we settled on some. I don't have them, but I'll get them and circulate them to the group here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they were looking at timelines along with what else is happening with town committees. It was frankly going to be, if memory serves me correctly, sometime, one of them was going to be sometime right before Thanksgiving, another one sort of mid-December or something.
Great.
But they were looking at exact times depending on what other committees were doing.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to have Elise here.
Yeah, so that's it. And I'm doing the liaison for the planning committee, but I haven't had a chance to go to the meetings. I've been looking at the agenda, nothing sort of finance related has
Exactly.
popped out.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Brian?
So I'm covering the library. They met on Tuesday. I didn't attend that meeting. Wasn't able to make it, but I do have the notes there. And there was nothing finance committee related, but there is a bit of good news here, which is that the libraries are actually going to be reopening at the end of this week, which is tomorrow. So they'll be resuming normal hours, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The Fowler branch is going to be 10 to 1. They'll close, clean, open at 2, and then close at 6. They're going to limit the number of patrons there that actually are able to physically be in the building at any one point in time, and that's really reflective of what the state guidelines are. So we've got our library back, which I think is fabulous. So there's that. They also just covered some administrative code stuff, so that was pretty much the extent of it. So nothing more to report there.
Great. Thanks, Brian. John?
So my committees have not met yet. Tax fairness was scheduled to meet tomorrow, but they've postponed that. And audit has not, doesn't meet till later in the year. So I'm sorry, I have nothing to report as of now.
I have a question for you, John. Do you know if the Tax Fairness Committee is looking at the $500,000 exemption? Did we talk about that? Remember, does this ring any bells to you at all?
Yes. Let me see, Mary, if I can remember how that works. I think the $500,000 exemption is already part of the existing program for senior tax exemption.
I'm not sure, but what I had heard at some point, and this might have been a pipe dream, was that when in the context of the conversations of the sustainable growth rate, somebody was saying that if you wanted to alleviate the tax burden on the middle income earners within the town, that a property tax exemption for the first 500,000 of assessed value would be one way to explore that. And
for qualifying seniors?
No, this was for everybody. This was just.
Oh, okay.
This was.
No, I can pretty confidently say that hasn't come up. Not for everybody.
Okay, then yeah. I wonder if you could just float that again. It's up to you. It's up to you. It's just. Yeah. I thought it was an interesting idea.
Sure. Well, the next meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 8, but my understanding is they have just postponed it for another week or so.
Okay, I know they were looking.
Find out, and I'll revisit that one.
Okay, I know they were looking for ideas, but anyway, so that was an idea. Have I missed anybody? I have missed the newcomers. So, Lois and Kathy, as you can see, everyone is assigned to a committee, and you go to their meetings or actually look at their meetings, and I will assign you to some committees that right now don't have coverage that should have coverage. But for the rest of you here, if you find that any of the committees that you're the observer to, would you please, and you find that you either can't make the meeting or you've lost interest or whatever, let me know. Because now that we have Kathy and Lois, now that we have a full bench now on the finance committee, we can maybe lighten the load for some of you if you feel like you've got too much on your plate. So get in touch with me in the next few days before I actually assign committees to Lois and Kathy. I haven't given my observer report, so I went to the chair's breakfast, and I also go to the select board meetings. I'll just supplement a little bit of the information that Dee shared with us about the schools. Yes, Sarah Wilson from Carlisle is the chair of the Regional High School Committee, and Court Booth is the chair of the CPS. Cynthia Rainey will continue to be the liaison to our committee because Court, I think, has a conflict, but Court is the chair. And I think he takes the budget very seriously, actually. And I know it's always an item on their agenda now. So it's a permanent item on their agenda. The other things I can tell you is that on the select board, they voted their chair will be Linda Escobedo. That's no surprise. The clerk is Susan Bates, which typically means that she would rise to be the chair next year. Stephen Crane also announced that the town has gotten some money from FEMA to help with COVID-related costs that weren't budgeted. So, Carrie, does this ring a bell to you?
The CARES Act He must have been talking about the CARES Act.
No, I think he said the CARES Act, and then he also said some money from FEMA, but it was unbudgeted. It was.
So there are certain expenses, pandemic-related expenses that are eligible for reimbursement through FEMA.
Great, okay.
But FEMA typically provides 75% reimbursement, and the local town is responsible for 25%. But under the CARES Act, that 25% can be paid through the CARES Act grant.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that clarification. The other thing I learned is that there are some grants available to small businesses. We've got $210,000 and then another grant for $215,000. So there's some help for small businesses around town. Some of the grants are up to $10,000 and some are only go as high as $2,500, but that's something. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that at the select board meeting, one of the new select board members was questioning the coordination with the town as far as funding multi-year large-scale projects. So I was glad to see that the select board is taking an interest in what we've been saying, which is to get a better handle on what are we spending both from the CPC side and from the town side over funding multi-year multi-million-dollar projects like Giroux, like the dredging, like White Pond. So now that was reassuring to me to hear that the select board is interested in seeing the information cut that way as well. That's about all I've got.
Long-term planning committee.
Wait.
As part of that, we're also going to try to make sure that those projects that are multi-year get communicated and presented at town meeting more effectively than has happened in the past.
See, that is, I think that's great news. Yeah. Who else had their hand up? Wade, did you have a comment?
The small business, the $200,000, who manages that money?
I don't know. I wrote it down.
Okay.
Do you want me to find out and get back to you? I can do that.
That'd be interesting.
I think the deadline, Wade, is like tomorrow.
Mary?
Andrea, go ahead. Yeah.
On
Go
that.
ahead.
I this morning I spoke to Marsha Rasmussen.
Yeah.
And she clarified some questions because I had started an application for that. The town is actually going to the state to see if they can get permission to change some of the guidelines, the income guidelines. It is the way it is now. It's for mainly low income. Your personal income as the business owner, the primary business owner.
Oh, okay.
Has to be fairly low. And there's been, I think she said there was one application from Concord that had come in, period. And so the town is trying to see if they can change the guideline for that on the income, because it's just too low. That money doesn't do us any good here in town for the most part. The other Concord Together one is being administered by the Community Chest, Concord Carlisle Community Chest.
Yep, good, thank you.
It's a one-time $2,500
yep.
award, and that's it. So really not much out there after the PPP to help the small businesses or even micro businesses in town or anywhere.
Does that answer your question, Wade?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
There will, maybe next Friday, she said, there may be a new guideline coming out. They're going to try for it.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea. Dee, did you have something?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one is, I understand the town's interest in helping the small businesses and our businesses in town. But one of the areas that I haven't heard anything from the town on is how can we support our nonprofits? We have some nonprofits in our town that are real generators of revenue, because the people who go to the Concord Museum or some of our other nonprofits, they then end up in town going to the restaurants or going shopping. So I just haven't heard anything about the nonprofit sector, and if there's any interest from the town's perspective on helping the nonprofit sector. And then my other really baffling question is when I watch the select board meetings, you know, they have the chair and then they have the clerk. And every time there's a roll call, it's always the clerk who does that. So I began to wonder about the role of our clerk. And
Our
what
clerk?
is our clerk, the FinCom clerk? And what is the role of the clerk? I know the guidelines chair, but I don't know what is the role of the clerk. And then we have a guidelines clerk.
The clerk mainly, when I was the clerk, what I mainly did was I looked at the minutes and made sure that the minutes accurately reflected what I heard. So that was the main thing. And I guess the other thing that is an important role for the clerk is to, I guess, listen and learn.
Oh, okay. I just, you know, it was just startling to me with the select board. It wasn't the chair who was doing the roll call or the chair who was taking the votes. You know, it was this clerk.
Yeah. Okay.
So it made me think of that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. CFO report. Carrie, where are you?
I'm here. So on behalf of myself and my staff, I want to thank you. We certainly appreciate the conversation that you had earlier this evening about taking another look at the fiscal 22 guidelines timeline, because as Dr. Hunter mentioned, we are also behind where we typically would be this time this year. So anything that you can do even to push that back a couple of weeks would be a big help for us. Typically, I'm most concerned about coming up with estimates for revenue and fixed costs. Going into this cycle, I'm much less worried about fixed costs because we already know, what we should be contributing to OPEB. We already know what our retirement assessment will be because the retirement board last year voted a 2-year assessment. We're feeling pretty confident about health insurance that the renewal will be very low. But the revenues and just the operating budget are just something that we would also struggle with. So we appreciate your consideration there. We right now are working to get the fiscal 20 budget that was just voted uploaded, and any backlog. We had only had certain expenses that we could process in the first 3 months, so we have a backlog of expenses to process. We're working with our auditors right now on fiscal 20. I think I said 20. I meant uploading 21. We're working with the auditors on the fiscal 20 budget. We're a little bit behind schedule there, so that really impinges on our ability to work on the 22 budget as well. On top of that, you probably have heard that the the townhouse is undergoing renovations. That won't start until November, but my office, the finance office, was moving out today and tomorrow and temporarily relocating at Knox Trail. So we're not open to the public, so that doesn't really impact the public, but it's just something else to put into the mix of everything. So we're very busy and would be appreciative of any extra weeks that you are able to give us with regard to the fiscal 22 budget.
We heard that.
How many times did I say it? 10?
We did. Okay. Any questions for Carrie? Any comments from anybody? Yeah, Chris.
I just, so Carrie, what do you, so what's the time lag on the state telling us our local receipts? So if we were really interested in having, like how much data would we have in December? I'm just curious how many months we would know.
Well, in a normal year, the state will not start talking about revenue until the beginning of December. They have a meeting that's typically in the first 2 weeks of December to inform the governor's thought process as he puts the budget together. And they usually have, very, very good data. I would say at least through October, maybe the middle of November when they have those hearings in December. The biggest problem we have now is the state has not passed a fiscal 20 budget.
Right.
And we do know what the big pieces of state aid will be for fiscal 20, but what we don't understand is how the state is funding.
Right.
Because state revenues have dropped off significantly, and they've actually provided an increase in Chapter 70, level funded unrestricted general government, and likely are level funding all of the smaller accounts.
Right. I mean, I presume it's out of the rainy day fund. They have a pretty big cushion there.
It has to be. I haven't heard specifically how they're doing that. I don't know if they can use their CARES Act funding to do that.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to do that in fiscal 22.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Baker's going to wait to see what he thinks the feds are going to give them, right? So there has to be, I assume they're thinking there's more money coming. But that's going to be the big guess for us, right? Is what's the state going to do what are we going to have for state aid? And then what do we have for local receipts? So that's why I'm trying to figure out what we'll know in December or January. So
I can tell you our local receipts are very confusing to me because our property tax collection is as strong as it ever is. Our building permit receipts are strong. We don't have any data yet on hotel, motel, meals tax. I know those won't be strong, but our first quarter receipts to date, we're almost through the end of the first quarter, do not look any different than any of the past years. So that's somewhat confusing to me, or confounding, I should say. It's not confusing, but.
Chris, this is Prosher. At the federal level, Congress goes out of session and home to campaign in the first couple of days of October. And the chances of getting additional stimulus money are pretty close to zero right now.
Yeah.
There's a lame duck session after the election where folks think that additional stimulus can pass depending on what happens with the election. So we won't know if we're going to get any more federal stimulus money until probably the end of the election, unless something dramatic happens to the economy. Between now and election, I don't think we can expect any news from the federal government about additional stimulus money.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions from citizens? Let me see if we have any citizens. No, I think it's just us.
I have a couple comments, Mary, if I could make them.
Go ahead, Dean.
All right. So the first is I just want to remind people about the email that I did send out, which is the continuing ed class that you can sign up for from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees about school finance. And that's on Tuesday, the 29th. It'll run from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., I believe.
Dean, can you send that to both Lois and Kathy and take one of my action items off my list?
Yes.
Dean, I believe it's the 30th.
Yeah, it's Wednesday.
It's Wednesday, the 30th.
Well,
They have other sessions starting on the 29th.
I have a receipt here in my mailbox. I will just pull it up. My receipt for charting the course, School Business and Finance, is for the 29th, Tuesday, September 29th at 5:30 p.m.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Hold on. That's all the other sessions. Hold on.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. It's Wednesday.
I had Wednesday.
Yeah, when you're right, you're right. Okay, stop. You're both right. You're all right. Okay.
Can you resend it to me
Yeah,
also?
I will send.
Just send it to me, Dean, and I'll send it out to the new distributor.
That's no problem.
Good, thank you.
That's my first comment. My second comment has to do with something that we struggled with, and we got really bad press about it, and then town meeting it kind of blew up as well. And that is when we approved the transfer of library funds at the end of the year to fund the legal account. The newspaper reported it with a very misleading headline that the finance committee was taking library money to do this. And I received, as the chair, comments on the dog at the dog park. I received comments from random citizens. Like, what are you guys doing? You're taking money away from the library to pay for this very divisive litigation. So people were confused about the way that worked. They just didn't understand the budgeting process. And then it came up in town meeting when a citizen, who was annoyed for that very reason, wanted to give money back to the library. And I stepped to the microphone and did explain it to those who were in attendance. But then I read this week's Concord Journal, and they once again kind of misreported it to say that we had taken money from the library and that this person had moved to restore it. And then the finance committee and the select board recommended no action, blah, blah. So we just look like we're taking the money from the library still. I was going to suggest that I write a letter to the paper or possibly suggest a guest column to describe how this happens and why we're not actually taking money from the library. I would just like some feedback from the committee. Would that be an okay idea? Or is it just not? Is it just let it pass? Forget about it.
You can certainly do it as an individual. I assume you're asking if you can do it as speaking for the finance committee.
Yeah, I would. That's kind of like I would just do it. Just former chair or whatever. Just finance committee, whatever. It does.
Dean, I think that's a great idea. There have been several misconceptions out there in the public domain with respect to what a finance committee approval actually constitutes, what it actually means. Yeah. And I think this would help clarify that. So I would say that's a good idea.
No, I would agree. And I would maybe, if there's a couple other examples that you know of, either last year or a couple of years, sort of a general, hey, let me clear up some myths or misconceptions.
This is a great idea. One that's really kind of boomeranged on us, that where the paper kind of contributed to the trouble.
I think it's a good idea. I would support that.
Dee, what do you think?
I think that Dean did an excellent job at town meeting in explaining what the process is. And I would let him just go off and tell it again, Dean, and tell everybody in your letter to the editor, because, you were spot on in terms of making sure people understood, or trying to make sure people understood what the situation was. And I don't think you need to add any other examples. I think you can use the library one.
Yeah.
Andrew, what do you think?
I think that if you can if they'll let you do a guest column or commentary, would be far more effective and noticed than a letter to the editor.
It would also give me a few more words of, column issues, because the letters to the editor are very brief. It'd be very hard to get. This is somewhat confusing. It might take a few more words. Yes.
Dean, I might be wrong, but I thought at one point people from the library also tried to clarify it.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yeah, no, you're right. They tried to clarify it.
Exactly. So it might even be more powerful if it was a joint letter. So if you had you and you had the person from the library both saying, this is not what happened. Because that was very powerful. I thought, it's like, obviously the library, if they felt that this was an affront to them and their budget, but they went out of their way to explain this is not how it works. So anyway, that's just an idea for you to think about. But I think it's a great
idea. Did I miss that? Was that also was that in the paper? I might have missed that.
I think it was.
Yes, it was.
I think it was.
Carrie Cronin wrote a letter distinguishing between the library corporation and what's funded by the town, and she got into that aspect of it. But I agree with Chris that having the library as, stand next to you would strengthen exactly what you said at town meeting.
Yeah. They would.
That might be good. I'll see what I can do, but I got to do it in the next couple of days because the timeline for this, I've already missed one issue of the paper. It's not going to be this week's paper, but.
I wonder if going forward, when we voted, let's take money out of the excess library and put it, so that's where it got, I think that's where it blew up. And I'm wondering if you think ahead to the end of next fiscal year, if Carrie, this is a question for you, if when we make these transfers, do we have to identify them as coming from a specific account, or can we just say surplus funds?
No, it has to say which line item it's coming from.
Too bad. Okay, Phil, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think this is a good idea too. It should be clarified, but Dean, I would suggest you avoid endorsing the procedure that we went through here, where the select board basically authorized overspending in advance, and then at the end of the year came to us.
All I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to sidestep all of that because all the rest of that, Phil, is very divisive. I'm just going to try to sidestep that and just treat it as a budgetary, this is a teachable moment here for people who need to understand how town budgeting works. It's not, I'm going to try not to put my feet in that too deeply because that just gets you into all of the puts and takes of whether the money should be spent or not be spent and all of that. I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I'm going to try to avoid some of that.
Right. Good.
Okay, so let's have a motion.
So moved.
What are you moving?
I think we need a motion.
Moving that Dean Banfield, as former chair of the Finance Committee, should write a letter to the Concord Journal and probably the Concord Patch, right? Do you submit it to there too?
Sure.
Regarding what happens with end of year funds.
Can I just add that it might be a guest commentary as opposed to a letter?
Yeah, I'll consult with the Journal as to what they would allow.
I think that would be much better. If you remember what happened to your letter last year.
Oh, that was a joke.
They
That was
butchered
a terrible experience. So I think Andrea's idea of making a guest commentary is a strong. And if you can get the library to partner with you, I think that would be great. Anyway, sorry, I just smushed up the motion. So a letter or a guest commentary.
Okay, we have a second.
Okay, go around. Chris.
Yes.
Me, Mary Hartman, yes. Dee.
Yes.
Kathy.
She's muted, but she said yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Dick.
Yes.
Wade.
Yes.
Lois.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Dean.
Yes. I guess I'm
Phil.
Yes.
Harsha. Brian.
Yes.
And who is that? John in the dark? John.
Yes.
always in the dark.
Great. So it's unanimous that this will happen. Okay,
All right.
great.
All right.
Anything else we need to discuss? Motion to adjourn?
Citizen comments?
I don't think we have any citizens.
We have one attendee.
Oh yeah, you're right. Citizen comment. Do I have any citizen comments? I'll keep it open a few more minutes, a few more seconds, actually.
Doesn't appear to be raising his hand.
No, he doesn't.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Chris.
Yes.
Me, yes. Dee.
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Dick.
Yes.
Wade.
Wait.
Lois.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Dean.
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
Harsha.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch. A lot of action items. See you October 8th.
Good night.
Good night.